Welcome, welcome, welcome. Oh my gosh, it's a spider crawling. Welcome as people jump on wherever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to this month's webinar. And I see people are plopping on here. I'm so excited. This is my first webinar of 2022 with the network, so I'm excited to be back for the next 6 months. And looking forward to sharing this time with so many of you. As people continue to jump on here, I do want to just go ahead and kick off today's enrichment series. So if this is your first time joining us, then I say welcome to you. If you are returning, then I say welcome back. And I'm excited that you're with us during this next hour. So I am Dr. Andrea Bowens-Jones. I am your host for this today's webinar. And before we get started and I begin to tell you about the great panelists that we have here today with Alex, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our enrichment series. This is a monthly series that is hosted by the P&G Alumni Network. The intention of it is to connect P&Gers because we all have a passion for learning, for equipping each other. And we're hoping that something that is said today that you'll be able to reapply it to your careers or wherever you are in your tenure now. We're hoping that it will provide insight and that we can leverage each other's expertise through this sharing hour. A little bit about who we are. We are a nonprofit that is fully sanctioned by P&G and is founded by former P&Gers. We are comprised of over 35,000 members, and this is globally, over 45 countries, and we are officially recognized and supported by P&G. And the connections are for enrichment, as I mentioned through our enrichment series. We also have a biennial conference that we get together, but we also have the philanthropic part of the portion as well, which for those that are not familiar is our P&G Foundation, Alumni Foundation. So if you were with us in November last year, then you remember our global conference. It's coming up again in 2023, so go ahead, mark your calendars to be there. We're hoping that this one will be in person in DC, and this is where we'll get together for a multi-day program of keynotes and panels and opportunities to network with people from all over the world. And we've had influential leaders on the stage. If you look at the list on the screen from 2021, Bino Dior, the former CEO of Clorox, Brian McNamara, GSK, Consumer Healthcare, and Monique Picot from Google, and many, many more. So we're excited that it'll return in 2023. And not only will it return, but it will return in person for it. So a little bit about the format. During today's discussion, hoping that you will have questions. There will be things that you'll be curious about, but you'll go ahead and use that Q&A function that you'll drop your questions in. We will take questions and have a designated time for Q&A at the end, but if there's a question that's pertaining to a particular topic and Alex feels the need, he'll go ahead and kind of respond to them in real time. But please do use that chat function or the Q&A function to drop your questions in. This is an interactive session, but before we get started, I do want to start with a few poll questions, and please take a moment to kind of respond to those to let us know who's here and who's in the audience. They should be on your screen now. And thank you for taking a moment to respond to this poll. And it looks like we have about almost everyone. I'll give it a few more seconds to respond before I close the poll. Let us know where you are in the world. Are you a part of the network? And let us know a little bit about you. Poll is closing in 10 seconds. Looks like I have about everyone responding. Thank you. Poll is closing now. All right. So we've done all the pre-work. We've done all the things that help us to get started. So I don't know about you, but I am ready to get started and ready to introduce my guest speaker for today. Are you ready, Alex? I know I'm ready. All right. So with us today, we have Alex von Schirmeister. I've messed it up. I'm so sorry, Alex. So you correct it when you get the mic over to you. And I was practicing and hoping I would get it right. But Alex joined Procter Gamble in Mexico after obtaining his business degree from Georgetown University in 1993. He spent 4 years in P&G's laundry and cleaning products category on brands such as Maestro Limpio, Ariel, and Salvo. Since obtaining his MBA in INSEAD, in 1998, Alex has worked in several sectors and industries and lived in various countries across Western Europe. Today, Alex is the managing director for Europe, Middle East, and Africa at Xero, a New Zealand founded and Australia listed cloud accounting software company. He and his family live in London. He will be speaking on the topic of will the digital marketing transformation produce CMOs for the future? So with that, I turn it over to you, Alex, to take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I appreciate it. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening. If anyone's joining in from Asia Pacific, good middle of the night to you. Listen, it's a real pleasure to be here. And this is my first P&G alumni chapter as well. I have to confess, I haven't been a very active member of the P&G alumni chapter, even though I have many former P&G colleagues and friends and try and stay in touch with some of them. The reality is I've moved about quite a bit and never really kind of re-engaged with any of the alumni chapters. So it's a real pleasure to be back. And I owe it to Ileana Rojas, who was a colleague of mine back at P&G Mexico, to have convinced me to join today and talk about this topic, will the digital marketing transformation produce the CMOs of the future? Let me very quickly just go through kind of the agenda. Would help if I can actually switch my slides. There you go. So I'll do kind of 5 things. One, just introduce myself and talk a little bit about who I am and where I come from. Most importantly, just to kind of capture a little bit of what I've done since P&G and make sure that I kind of give some credibility to the topic I'm going to be discussing. I want to specifically talk a little bit about my experience at P&G, and it's quite some time ago. So I think it's just important to put it in perspective of when it was and what was going on at the time. And the lessons I learned, and again, this is with the benefit of significant backdrop many, many years later. The lessons I learned during my time there and to what extent I've taken those forward into the remainder of my career to date. And then I want to talk a little bit about marketing organizations then and now, right? The marketing organization I was familiar with and I was immersed in while at P&G, but then some of the marketing organizations that I've been involved in since then, and some of the ones that I shaped since then, and how they compare to each other. And more importantly, talk a little bit about the consequences of those when it comes to marketing careers and marketing capability and skill set development. And then last but not least, talk a little bit about some proposals as to what we do about that. I realize that many of you will have very, very, very different experiences on this webinar. Hopefully, a few of my former colleagues are actually on this call, either colleagues from my time at P&G Mexico or colleagues from other walks of life and other parts of my career. And you may or may not recognize yourself in some of my anecdotes and stories. And you may or may not agree or disagree with them, right? That's all fine. I think it's important just to know this is very much based on my personal experience, my perception, my recollection of facts at the time. But I'm more than happy to be corrected on any of them. And with that, let me maybe just dive in. First of all, who am I kind of in 2 parts, right? You probably picked up on my name. I have a very Germanic name. I was actually born and raised 2 German parents in Mexico, and I have both the German and the Mexican nationalities. I did live and work and study in Mexico for the first 23 years of my life, and I still consider myself very much a citizen of Mexico and very Latin. I got my undergraduate studies in the US back in 1993. And after finishing my undergrad studies, I went back to Mexico, and that's when I joined Procter Gamble. So I joined Procter Gamble in the early 90s. Ed Arzt was the CEO at the time, before he then went to kind of the dual CEO-ship of Dirk Jaeger and John Pepper. And so I was at P&G Mexico during that time, 1993 to 1997. 97, I chose to leave to pursue an MBA. I did that in France. And I've been in Europe ever since. That one flight to France ended up being a one-way ticket to Europe. I haven't really been back to Latin America since. Started my MBA in France. I later in London met my wife, who is French. That's why it says partner. And I later in life had my son at a time when we were living and I was working in France. And so France has become a bit of a second home to me, just because of my family relations. At some point, I was lucky enough to spend some time in Spain and lived in Madrid. My daughter was born in Madrid. And then I was also lucky enough to have some stints that brought me to Zurich in Switzerland, to Berlin in Germany. And I'm now living in the UK for the second time. So I was in the UK in kind of early 2000s, and I'm back in the UK since 2015. So that just kind of give you a bit of a landscape in terms of where I've been. In terms of what I've done, very briefly, I started my career, my first job out of university at Procter Gamble, and I was very, very, very strongly conditioned to wanting to pursue a marketing career. But I was also very early on conditioned to the fact that at P&G, certainly at the time, brand management and marketing was seen as a school towards general management. And so I was pretty clear in the early days that being a brand manager really meant being a general manager of a P&L and would eventually lead to general management. And for many, many years in my career, I pursued that path of graduating from marketing to more general management, which I eventually did. After my MBA, I very briefly tasted consulting. I thought I wanted to try it. I didn't like it. Consulting was never as tangible, and it didn't have the adrenaline of really owning a P&L and a team. And I very quickly got frustrated. And so I decided to go back to industry. I ended up spending some time in Telefonica, in the telco sector, in a marketing role. And this was very much a kind of headquarter marketing role, influencing regional marketing. So I didn't have any direct marketing responsibility on any particular market, but I had more of a global headquarter marketing role doing marketing coordination. And then I went to eBay, and eBay really was my introduction to digital marketing tools. At the time, the reason eBay hired someone like myself was precisely because they were growing and very much honing in on digital marketing capabilities. And they realized that what they were missing was a more classical marketing training or point of view. And so they specifically and purposefully went out on the market to look for someone who brought that more classical marketing background. And with my P&G and Telefonica credentials at the time, I was able to do that. And so I joined eBay France at the time as a marketing director back in 2004. And I ended up spending 11 years at eBay in various roles. Eventually, from being the marketing director in France, I wanted to become a general manager, so I became the general manager for the eBay France subsidiary, and then went back to marketing by becoming the CMO of eBay across Europe. At the time, eBay didn't have a global CMO. They had a European CMO and a North American CMO, and we did quite a bit of best practice coordination or coordination on certain projects together. But that was my time at eBay. And then eventually at eBay again, I decided I wanted to come back to general management. And so I ended up managing a portfolio of various countries across Europe in a full P&L. After eBay, I tried something completely different, which was a transformation role at a very, very old classical English publicly listed company called Ariel Components. And Ariel Components at the time was looking for people coming out of digital. I'd just been at eBay for 11 years. They were looking for people coming out of digital to help them transform a legacy business to become more digital. And so I became the Chief Digital Technology and Innovation Officer. And basically it was kind of a soup to nuts transformation of a non-digital company into a digital company, not just in marketing, but across the user experience, across data usage, across technology and the technology architecture. I missed at the time the more direct to consumer and more direct digital business. And so after 3 years at RS, I went to SumUp, a startup. My first experience working in a venture capital-backed startup. I myself have been involved in venture, and I am quite involved in startups from a financing point of view, but I've never worked in one. And so at SumUp, I became the general manager for the European business. And then the pandemic hit, which had certain consequences. And as of December of this year, I am at Xero. For those that don't know Xero, Xero is a New Zealand founded company that sells cloud accounting software to small and medium businesses, as well as to accounting and to bookkeeping practices. And so it's very much a software as a service model with cloud accounting products. And in parallel to that, at the bottom, as I mentioned, I am involved in venture. So I do finance and I work with entrepreneurs in seed capital and startups. And more recently, I've also started doing some advisory work for private equity. So that's kind of just a quick run through in terms of what I've done and where I've done. And more importantly, what I want to hone in is the time that I've spent in different marketing roles in very different types of organizations, as well as the way I still observe marketing now from a general management perspective. Now, while at P&G, just kind of winding back to my time at Procter Gamble in Mexico, and you know, some people, especially if there are any P&G Mexicans on the call, you may recognize the entrance to Loma Florida 32, which was Procter & Gamble's office. I think they've moved since. But you'll also recognize the location of our factory in Mexico, which was in Vallejo. And Vallejo had, at the time, P&G's second largest laundry detergent factory in the world. And it was quite important, and I do point that out because as part of my experience early on at Procter & Gamble, having the factory in the country meant that I think we were quite lucky from an experience perspective in also getting involved in the manufacturing, in the supply chain, in the logistics of supply chain side of things. And compared to certain notes I've compared with P&Gers from other countries who may not have had a factory as nearby, and who may have had a more arm's length relationship with supply chain or with manufacturing. That was not the case in Mexico. Most products, not all of them, but most products in Mexico, whether it was soaps or shampoos or laundry and cleaning products, we were very involved in all aspects of the manufacturing of it. And then at the bottom, you see some of the brands I was involved in. Mr. Clean or Mr. Proper or Maestro Limpio doesn't really need an introduction, nor does Ariel, obviously the largest detergent brand for P&G worldwide, alongside Tide. Salvo does probably need an introduction for anyone who's not joining from Mexico. And I think that's one of the other things that made P&G Mexico stand apart. We still had a handful of what I'm calling endemic brands. So there were brands that are not part or were not part of the global P&G brand portfolio. And as a consequence, really behaved quite independently. They would have been part of a category, which was a global category. Obviously, dish washer or dish cleaning was a global category. But because Salvo wasn't, the actual interaction with a global brand manager or a global category leader was very, very arm's length. At this point, P&G around the world mostly sold either Dawn or Fairy in a liquid format. And Mexico was really an exception at the time in still selling a powder dishwashing product called Salvo with no real other equivalent around the world. And so I certainly consider myself quite lucky having been involved and exposed in a brand, which because it was endemic to the Mexican market, had less interaction maybe with Cincinnati or with headquarters, but ultimately meant a lot of the learning, a lot of the independence at a very young age in Mexico was because I was working on a brand that was quite low. And a few other things just to point out about P&G Mexico at the time for anyone who isn't from Mexico or isn't necessarily aware of it. First of all, it's a massive market, right? Mexico at the time had, I think about 110 million citizens. Obviously, that's even bigger now. So it's a huge market for not only for Procter & Gamble, for anyone. And it really meant that the importance of the market in the P&G landscape was quite significant. I already mentioned the fact that we had our own manufacturing. It had a very, very large wholesale channel, and the channels would have varied by product category. But certainly in laundry and cleaning products, wholesale was roughly 60% of the sales. And it was a very specific and incredibly fascinating channel to get involved in in a way that, obviously you sold to wholesalers very differently than you would say to supermarket chains. I already talked about endemic brands. And then the other thing that in hindsight, I learned a lot from was having been in Mexico during the December 94 currency crisis, which later triggered the famous tequila effect across Latin America. And the reason I say that is because I think in a career, having been exposed to a crisis, in this case, it was a currency crisis with currency freezes, inflation freezes by the government, and you can imagine the consequences that had on marketing budgets, on pricing strategy, etc. It was just really, really fascinating at a very early stage in one's career, and as a kind of brand manager or assistant brand manager, to be exposed to that kind of crisis management environment. So that's kind of P&G. Now let me, in hindsight, I've just tried summarizing a few of the main lessons I learned. There were obviously many, many, many more, but I think these are some of the ones that are most relevant and have stayed with me in one shape or other during that time. The first one, and some of these should be self-evident, especially to P&Gers, it's just the power of concise written communication. And again, I don't know how much of this P&G still does today, but this notion of being able to summarize absolutely everything in a single page, even though it often meant fooling around with font sizes and margins and what have you not, but still at the end of the day, you had to fit something on a single page. And I think most brand assistants or ABMs at the time would remember how many times they wrote their very first ever one-pager and how many times it got corrected and sent back to them, just for the sheer learning experience of kind of mastering the art of being able to summarize everything on a single page. And in those one pages, probably the most important part is this notion of the executive summary, right? The ability to consolidate everything into a single paragraph and then build your argumentation afterwards. And then the discipline of writing a brief, whether it's a media brief, whether it was a copy brief. I have since read many really shitty briefs in my life. And it's just incredible how powerful the P&G school was in terms of learning to hone in on a well-written brief that you would then use with agencies or with anyone else really to outline what you were trying to achieve. The other thing that I think P&G was very good at back then, and this is early days, was just the clarity of objective setting through this objective goals, strategy, and measures procedure. Many companies have since moved to OKRs, which is kind of from the Intel school, but ultimately very similar schools around just being very clear on documenting your objectives, your goals, your strategies, and your measures. And then maybe most importantly, these are not necessarily in order of importance, customer understanding or centricity. I distinctly remember my very first week at Procter & Gamble sitting hours and hours and hours behind one-way mirrors, listening to focus groups and just discovering what qualitative research even meant and what a focus group was and how you selected your panelists. And since then, I've spent quite a bit of time in companies that espouse or pretend to be very customer-centric. And the reality is, it's hard to get right? I mean, this was almost a religion at P&G. It was an absolute art form, and the relationship you would have as a brand manager with your research team, and the way you would regularly go back to the market, not only for qualitative, but single product blind tests, or the whole discipline around constantly checking with your customers, was very, very unique, and I've never seen it applied that religiously anywhere else as a Procter & Gamble. Needless to say, brand, the significance of brand equity, brand positioning, and what it means to actually be a guardian of your brand is something that was always taken very, very seriously at Procter & Gamble. And actually, I remember my very first day at P&G, not just my first week, my very first day at P&G, my boss at the time literally just sitting me down, bringing out this big kind of cassettes, 3/4 cassettes, and just saying, look, you're going to go through the entire reel of Ariel copy of the last, I don't know, at the time, I think it was like 40 years of Ariel copy. And it was just this notion of you need to make sure that you imprint the importance of brand into your brain at an early age. Knowing your numbers, again, this is all pre-computers and laptops and iPhones, where numbers typically meant carrying a very, very large folder on your arm everywhere you went. But even better was when you didn't actually look them up, you had them memorized. And then I talked about this earlier already, right? This notion at P&G around brand management is actually a prep school for general management, not necessarily a prep school for just marketing. And the last thing I would say, and this has served me well, is this importance of the balance between on-the-job training with formal learning and development courses, right? There was a very clear rhythm at Procter & Gamble at the time as to when you started going to Copy College 1 or Media College 2 or Advanced Copy College 3, et cetera, and just to make sure that as you progressed in your career, you were also being accompanied and brought along in terms of formal training. So that's kind of my recollection. Now, mind you, this is over 25 years old, but my recollection of my time at P&G is certainly some of the lessons that I've carried with them. By the way, what I should have said at the beginning is I'll obviously do Q&A at the end. If you have questions in the meantime, you want to pop them in, by all means, just pop them in. Depending on the nature of the question, I may just jump on it right away, or I may park it and leave it at the end. But certainly feel free to pop them in at any point of time. Now let's look at org designs. And again, look, org designs have evolved, and I'm sure org designs have evolved at Procter & Gamble since I was there. And frankly, they should have, right? There's just no way that simple org design of 1993 would hold up nowadays anymore. But the reason I want to go into org design a little bit is just to, I guess, visualize some of the simple models of not only the org design itself, but also what it meant from career pathing perspective versus some of the complexity of org designs today. And in that sense, I'll just go back to the kind of the P&G org model of the time. And again, this may have evolved since then. But back then, you basically had, depending on the category, a marketing manager or a marketing director who would be in charge of multiple brands within a category. And he or she would have several brand managers, depending on how many brands were typically in that category. And most of those brand managers would be in charge of a single brand within that category. And in some cases, depending on the size of the brand, maybe two brands, two smaller brands. And then each brand manager, he or she would have a number of brand assistants and assistant brand managers. During my time at P&G, they got rid of brand assistants and it was just assistant brand managers. And so you would have several assistant brand managers. A large brand, the largest brand we had at Procter & Gamble Mexico across all categories at the time was Ariel. Ariel would probably have had 4 assistant brand managers. Many other brands would have had 1 or 2. And the way those ABMs split their work typically was either along projects, but they were in charge of different launches or different specific projects, or oftentimes around sub-brands or brand extensions. So a good example, an Ariel would have been Ariel with bleach and Ariel regular, and then something else. And so that's the way you would split it up. Now, the benefit of that, right, was first of all, a typical ABM would get full exposure to all elements of the marketing mix very, very quickly. You would really be involved in every aspect, from market research to, as I mentioned earlier, kind of supply chain management or the relationship with the factory. Certainly, if you were involved in a launch, any sort of kind of artwork development or new artwork development, including legal validations. If you were doing either wholesale or supermarket, you would be involved in sampling programs, kind of demos in store, pricing decisions, finance decisions, budget decisions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It would be an incredibly wide-ranging 360-degree immersion in what it means to be an assistant brand manager. There would typically have been significant involvement in the product roadmap, and anything in terms of validating new products, product improvements or entirely new products, doing the research on them and working with the R&D or the PD department to make sure that those products got developed and eventually launched. And as a result of that, there was just significant on-the-job learning and development, right? And the learning was really kind of a hand-me-down learning and apprenticeship. Brand managers trained assistant brand managers to become the next brand manager. And then those brand managers would eventually move out to marketing manager. And don't get me wrong, it was a very, very competitive up or out environment, but it was an environment where basically all the tools were being given to you within that role to train for the next hierarchy level and the next hierarchy level after that, the next hierarchy level after that. And what you would typically also find is that this internal org design was typically mirrored by one or two external agencies, right? Most of these brands would have had a single copy development agency or creative agency, and then maybe a separate media buying agency or agency of record. Sometimes that would be the same agency. But so it was a very simple design, and that was mirrored by external. That was then. This is now. Let's talk about a more typical org design today. And again, it's just an illustration of an org design. I've seen many different variations and flavors of this. I've purposefully dumbed it down into only 4 boxes. It could be as many as 8. Depends on where you put certain things. We can certainly talk about that. But fundamentally, some of the marketing sub-disciplines have become extremely specialized. And the advent of digital in particular has meant that some of them are just so incredibly complex that the capabilities and skills required to master them are quite different. I remember at eBay, for example, my performance marketing team, which was in charge of buying media in internet environments, whether it's affiliate marketing or paid search, advertising on Google, or search engine optimization. About 2/3 of the team were mathematicians or physicists. They were not engineers or not marketers. It was just a very different breed of marketer than what I typically would have seen in marketing organizations earlier. Now, because of that, sorry, let me just move this out. There's been a significant fragmentation of the capabilities within the marketing teams, right? You oftentimes have marketing teams with these pockets of very specialized individuals. And that has just meant there's a real fragmentation. If anything, there's a huge omen now on the marketing manager to make sure that the different people managing these teams coordinate amongst each other and work with each other. And so a lot of work gets done around internal coordination, internal communication to make sure that these marketing teams are talking to each other. Oftentimes, these teams are now more distant from product. Obviously, it depends on what the product is, whether the product is an online experience or user experience, or whether it's still a physical product, whether we're talking B2C, B2B. But oftentimes, these teams are now so involved in the optimization of demand generation via media channels that they no longer, and again, I'm generalizing, but they no longer necessarily have the same line or same connection back to influencing the actual development of the product. And if anything, you now often have separate product organizations, separate product marketing organizations. And one of the challenges in organizations is to have a product marketing organization with the marketing organization talking to each other and coordinating. As you can imagine, this has made the skill set transfer much more challenging just because of the complexity of channels and technology. And as I said, it requires internal alignment. Now, this internal org design complexity now is often mirrored by several external agencies or separate software vendors, right? You may have one team working with Adobe for CRM tools and another team working directly with Google and Google Analytics for something else, and another team working with Salesforce, et cetera. And if anything, venture capital has meant that there's a plethora of software providers selling all sorts of marketing tools that are often best in breed at solving for content or for CRM or for SEO or for performance marketing. But it's very rare nowadays to find a marketing organization working with one or two single vendors, but rather having a lot of them, adding more complexity. Now, in some cases, org designs have now evolved even further by actually separating out. So, find my mouse. There you go. Separating it out, what is still called marketing, what has been completely redefined, and what is growth. This is what I'm particularly nervous about, because it basically means that some organizations have reduced the role of the marketing manager to what I'm calling storytelling, right? It's the pretty stories, and yes, it's the TV copy or some of the above the line copy production and above the line media buying. certainly some of the content writing and scripting for either online experiences or not, but then separately having this growth manager organization, which is what I'm calling here the mathematicians, right? That's where the optimization of traffic or optimization of user journeys or optimization of next best actions is happening. Oftentimes now machine learning fueled, artificial intelligence fueled, oftentimes highly programmatic, and oftentimes just totally computerized and very, very, very disconnected, if you're not careful, very disconnected from the actual segment and user understanding and the storytelling. And so the arrival of this growth manager, in some cases, by the way, doesn't even report into CMO. I've certainly seen cases where growth managers now report into sales or into finance or somewhere else in the organization. It typically, when you see this manifestation, typically means that above the line digital media buying has separated. It means that there's almost a separation of upper funnel consideration, which is the job of a marketing manager, and lower funnel conversion, which becomes the job of growth manager. But again, if it's not coordinated, it creates a real rift. And at the same time, some of the people in charge of building the brand or managing the brands do so in isolation of considering the digital channels that that brand is later going to be funneled into. And it begs the question as to where the ownership of things such as segmentation or value proposition or generating insights or positioning in the positioning brand. And it puts an even bigger omen or burden on internal alignment and coordination. So here kind of, again, caricature images of organizations and organization development. But as you can see, I think the key highlight here is you start seeing a real separation of certain marketing capabilities and some of the newer kind of digital capabilities. Now, why am I mentioning that? And what does that mean is, and I think there's a real rift happening, right? And again, this is new, this has been happening for quite some time, but whereas previous marketers operated across a broad range of less complex channels, and that kind of upward mobility towards the CMO was attained through being a good performer and just learning on the job for long enough that you could attain that. Most younger marketers today are being thrown into specific channels and developing very, very deep, detailed channel expertise. And they're getting specialized very early on in the mechanics of that single channel. And it's difficult then to fathom how you take those very, very specialized channel marketing experts and you kind of pull them out of that detail to still become generalist enough to understand the broader marketing environment, marketing channel. And don't get me wrong, I don't think a CMO, I don't think the marketing manager nowadays could possibly be an expert in every single little aspect of marketing the way maybe was the case 20, 25 years ago. There's just too many channels and permutations. It's just too complex. And just like I wouldn't expect the CFO to have done, treasury and M&A and FP&A, et cetera, right? At some point, you have to assume that as a chief marketing officer, as a chief finance officer, there's a significant role in your general leadership of the team and experience, and the fact that you know how to best galvanize the team and leverage the expertise that's in it. But you should ideally still have a pretty good idea as to how you get the best out of those teams and what those teams do, and more importantly, how you get them to work with each other and you coordinate them. Now, in that sense, right, I am worried that there's a real risk of erosion of core foundational marketing skills. And now this may apply in particular to technology-based companies or digital-based companies or digital pure plays. And the reason I say that is digital, and I saw this at eBay over and over and over again, right? A digital pure play company naturally will pay a premium to the mathematician capabilities or the growth manager capabilities of buying traffic and driving traffic and converting traffic. There's a natural discount to the importance, not a complete ignorance of the importance, but a natural discount to the importance or the capability of being able to good storytelling. And if you're not careful, that comes and bites you in the ass. And I distinctly remember when I was at eBay, I was a chief marketing officer for eBay Europe in Zurich at the time. And while we were doing okay from a performance perspective, we were buying all the right keywords and driving all the right traffic and converting it. The actual positioning of eBay was diluting and diluting and diluting. And the reality is we were just not telling the story anymore. We didn't know. We knew how to buy traffic and get it to land on the landing page and convert. But we had forgotten to actually tell users what eBay was supposed to be in the first place and what it was about and what user we were trying to attract. So all notion of segmentation and storytelling had not entirely gotten lost, but it certainly had diluted. And guess what? Solution, what did I do? Well, I was in Zurich. I knew there were a lot of P&Gers in Geneva, and I hired a whole bunch of P&G colleagues. And it was a very, very interesting journey in terms of P&G colleagues with that capability, that core foundational marketing skill arriving in what was an environment which was very much honed in on the digital side. And slowly doing two things. On the one hand, slowly influencing that digital marketing machinery with the importance of getting the fundamentals right, understanding your customer, segmenting your customer, making sure you had the right value proposition for the right segment, and only then worrying about which channel to communicate it in. So they started doing that influence. But on the other hand, it was interesting to see the learning curve of those P&G colleagues in terms of them suddenly being exposed to digital media buying of a level of sophistication that they hadn't seen before, and becoming over time really, really, really fluent and competent in digital marketing and the notion of how those channels. Now, I guess to answer the question, will digital marketing transformation produce the CMOs of the future? I don't think so. I actually think marketing as an art form is fundamentally challenged if we're not careful. And I am worried, and I field calls from headhunters quite regularly who call and say, Alex, we're looking for marketing, can you please recommend someone? And it's becoming increasingly difficult to identify people who can create that bridge, who kind of are able to cover both those aspects, and people who've had sufficient experience in both what I'm calling storytellers and mathematicians to be able to tell that story credibly. But I do think there are things that marketing organizations, marketing managers, CMO can do to help. The first one, and by the way, we did these when I was at eBay and to some success. First one is, especially in the early years, create aggressive marketing job rotations or marketing leadership programs where you can very quickly rotate university graduates or master graduates as you bring them in through kind of 6-month spins through different disciplines. And so you make sure that before you bed someone down as an SEO specialist or a paid search specialist or affiliate marketing specialist or CRM or what have you not, that you actually make sure that you give them during 2-3 years proper exposure to various aspects and very different aspects of what a full marketing set looks like, so that they can potentially still specialize, but they have a very good broad understanding of how the marketing machinery works together or should work together. Similarly, and again, this I didn't invent this. This comes from those P&G copy colleges. Make sure if you can to develop aggressive learning and development programs or certifications internally. One thing eBay did very well when I joined was having kind of a marketing college for new joiners. And in my case, it was very useful because I came from a non-digital marketing environment, and that marketing college allowed me to learn some aspect of digital marketing I just didn't know. And equally later in Europe, we created a marketing academy where we took our entire marketing staff across all disciplines and put them through a proper curriculum with proper certification of this marketing academy. And then last thing is just leveraging your agency networks and make sure that you force your different agencies to work together between your creative agencies and your media buying agencies, and obviously you mirror that with your internal teams. But I do think there's a huge burden or obligation for the marketing leaders to now overcompensate and make sure that those teams work much more closely together. Because if you don't, you'll just have this natural split of the capabilities within the team. That's kind of what I have. I think at this point, I'd rather stop here and see if there are any questions from anyone. I don't see, let me see if I can actually get the question chat. I don't see any questions in there now.
Nope. But I can go ahead and start with one.
Go ahead,
Please
Andrea.
yes, please do drop your questions into the chat function. We're going to go ahead and start the Q&A. First of all, thank you, Alex, for a great presentation. I was previously over here taking notes, even though I don't have a marketing background, but I do think it's important, no matter where you are, to kind of learn from those things. Now, you had mentioned about this erosion of a core marketing skill when you were giving your example of going from mathematics, storytelling to mathematics. Can you speak a little bit more on if you've seen actual examples of people learning to go from storytelling to mathematics and vice versa? And what did you see was contributed to their success going back and forth?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Andrea. And this, I actually think there is, when you say back and forth, I think there's one direction which is easier than the other.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is, I think if you come from the storytelling side, and again, I hope everybody understands, I'm purposely exaggerating and drawing caricatures here, right? And not everybody's just a storyteller mathematician. I think a lot of people are able to do both. I'm purposefully kind of categorizing. But when you come from that side, I think there's a fundamental training in trying to define your audience, understand your audience, developing a value proposition, make sure that you're able to convey that value proposition through the positioning and ultimately through the dramatization of the story, right, copy. And then quite naturally start thinking about, well, now that I have that, what are the right channels where I'm going to find this audience? And what do I need to do to buy media in that channel? And yes, the media in that channel has become more complex, but I think it's more naturally incumbent on the storyteller to kind of pursue it all the way to the end and say, well, now that I have my story, I now want to make sure that I buy it properly. I think it's more challenging for the other side, just because when you're a media buyer, and you're strictly speaking media buying in a very, very, very sophisticated mathematical environment, and it's all around just the marginal optimization of that extra penny and extra cent, and am I buying this keyword or that keyword, and what are kind of some of the programmatic audiences. You can go really, really far through media optimization and conversion rate optimization purely based on the mathematics and the results, without necessarily having to reverse engineer into, well, what are we actually selling here, right? Or what is it that we're actually doing, or what do we stand for? And so I think just from a kind of, how do you cross-train or cross-pollinate? I find it probably not more natural and easier to go from the classical marketing to digital than the other way around, from someone who's purely digital into classical marketing. And one of the things whenever I speak to younger marketers who are typically very, very deeply embedded in digital marketing or in performance marketing or in kind of advanced CRM, I kind of encourage them to spend more time on the kind of brand side of the house to learn that, because I think it's something they're less naturally inclined to do. I hope that kind of answers the question.
No, that absolutely does, and it makes a lot of sense because it's a skill that has to be developed. Now, there's a question in there. I'm assuming you read Spanish. I am not bilingual. So thank you, Miguel, for dropping in your question. I'm going to let Alex read that one and respond.
I can't read it in my question, though. Can you maybe copy paste it? I can read the chat for some reason, but not the question. I don't know why.
Oh, yes, I forgot about that.
Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, it's in the chat. Okay.
Yes.
Llegó Alex, alegría de verte nuevo después de 26 años. Ah, Miguel, excellent. Hola, Miguel, ¿cómo estás? Yeah, he's basically just saying hello. It doesn't look like a question.
See, I know hola. That's about as far as I could get. But okay. Didn't know if it was a question you could respond to. If there are any other questions, please drop it in.
But it's very good to know that I have former colleagues listening in, and hopefully they're not completely shocked at my interpretation of events from 25 years ago.
Well, I haven't been gone that long, and yes, you were very, very close to what I remember from 7 years ago. Okay, another question as we're waiting for others to drop in. In today's digital world, and especially in digital pure play brands, do you really still need traditional marketing capabilities? Like we just spent the last 10 minutes or so in your presentation and with the last question talking about it. It's like, do we really still need it if at the end of the day, it's about that P&L sheet?
100,000 million percent yes, you do. I think fundamentally, again, it's easy to get lost in this noise around growth hacking. Is all around spending a lot of money and getting traffic and converting people. But at the end of the day, I think the traditional marketing of properly understanding your audience, making sure that that audience understanding is being fed back to the user experience of the product or the product experience you're developing, to make sure that you have a product market fit, making sure that you generate insights to know how to talk to that audience compellingly and to convert them, not just convert them because they click, but fundamentally convert them to become loyal users of your brand. That skill set and capability, I just don't think you can replace that ever. And so I still think even today when I speak to, when I go to university to speak at universities, and a lot of people talk about, well, they want to join Pinterest and Google and Facebook and Netflix and what have you not. I fundamentally think that fast-moving consumer good companies like Procter & Gamble, and I'd like to think that some of the others, offer an incredibly critical kind of foundational school in terms of those capabilities. But nowadays, they're no longer enough, right? I do think in today's day and age, you need to be relatively comfortable with digital marketing channels, and the complexity and the technology feeding them. And that's only going to go faster and evolve even further, right? I mean, for those of us on this call who are old enough to potentially have children who are now heavy TikTok users, and maybe some of you are TikTok users. I don't want to. It just TikTok didn't exist 5 years ago, right? And now you'd be dead as a marketer if you don't understand the power TikTok has. So the speed at which new channels are being developed and the marketing mechanics to master those channels is absolutely mind-blowing. And I think it's interesting as a marketer, right? How do you stay young? How do you stay fresh, right? How do you stay in touch with that development while at the same time still appreciating kind of the more classical school of marketing?
Yeah. And you mentioned just now that you go often to universities to speak. Do you think this is something that is being lost in the education system? So when it comes time to kind of land those jobs, the new hires that are coming in do not have those classical skills. Any perspective on that?
Yeah, I think, and to be fair, and at least this is my experience, I'm not sure that I ever felt that the university played a role in giving me those skills. The reality is, I felt like those skills were given to me on the job at Procter & Gamble, so I think that kind of first job experience and those first few job rotations as a recent graduate are really, really important. The challenge is just from a sheer, kind of, I guess, attractiveness of the brands as an employer, right? The employee value proposition of some of these technology brands, they're showing up with massive budgets and very kind of promising careers. And so I think students are more easily swayed nowadays by a career at Facebook or Google or Stripe or Twitter or what have you not, and less so by some of the more traditional. Yeah, and so I think just from an employee value proposition, right? Some of these more classical, fast-moving consumer good companies, they need to compete with that, right?
Yeah, that's good.
Excellent.
So
I see
true.
there's another former colleague of mine, Pedro. ¿Cómo estás? Absolute pleasure. I haven't seen Pedro's name in a long time. Do you expect marketing organizations going back to basics, as in grouping different disciplines versus the current increase in specialized managers per discipline? It's a good question, Pedro. I don't know that you can. I've been tempted to do it. When I've been leading marketing organizations, I've been tempted to do it, and every single time, I think the real challenge is, will you optimize for an organizational design, or will you optimize for results? And as you can imagine, more often than not, you optimize for results, and you'll just get better results by having real experts honing in on the particular discipline, the particular challenge. So I don't really see a world where you put them together. I think what is likely to happen, though, is that because of this notion of, if I have all these organizations, kind of sub-disciplines in marketing, how do I make sure that they're coordinated? I think two things are going to happen. One, organizations may look at creating a layer or kind of managerial layers to at least bring some of them together more naturally, right? And listen, I mean, at eBay, for example, I had what we called internet marketing, but within internet marketing, you had search engine optimization, you had paid search, you had affiliate marketing, you had display marketing, you had mobile marketing, you had social media marketing, right? So in a sense, they were pulled together as internet marketing, but you still had experts in each one of them. The other thing I'm seeing, and I'm an investor in one company that does exactly that, right? Just for full disclosure, is you'll increasingly see software coming in and trying to, at least through software, keeping the different disciplines more easily aligned and coordinated, right? So when you think about companies like Trello and Jira and Miro boards and Slack, right? All of those are tools that are now readily used in companies to make sure that even though you have all these disciplines, you try and create tools and technology where those disciplines then kind of interact and coordinate more easily.
Yes, thank you. And hopefully that addressed your question. We have time for one more question before we close out our time together. Any more questions from the attendees? So before I go into the kind of closing remarks, how about you, Alex? Any last perspective that you'd like to add, share with the attendees to today's session about maybe the difference?
All I'll say is, look, it's one of many topics that I've spent the last few years reflecting on. As I said, I only provided a point of view. Please feel free to either email me or ping me on LinkedIn. It's great to see you. Obviously, I see a few friends and people I know have been on the call, which is always great. And then the other thing is provide feedback. Happy to hear points of view. Happy to be either proven right or wrong. So if this is a chance to reconnect with the P&G alumni network at large, and also with former colleagues, obviously always happy to do that. So thank you, everyone.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and take over and do some last minute announcements. So if you can stop your share. Yes. This has been great. And on behalf of the P&G Alumni Network, I'd like to thank you for sharing your time with us and for your knowledge and kind of talking about your expertise areas. So as we wrap up today's today's webinar, a few announcements. Please do mark your calendars. Next month's webinar will be creating an always-on culture of transformation. And our guest panelist will be Billy Lagar. He's a Senior VP of Brand at Constellation Brands. Please do get involved. So if this is your first time attending a webinar, don't let it be your last. Sign up for the updates, and that's on pgalums.com. You can also support the foundation that I mentioned at the very beginning. We do a lot in terms of giving, just like as P&Gers we got accustomed to doing. Partner with us by sponsoring at pgalums.com, but you can also volunteer. I am a volunteer, and many other people that serve in the network are also volunteers. And you can find out more information at hello@pgalums.com. Today's session, as well as all the previous webinar sessions, are recorded and will be available on YouTube in the coming weeks. So if you missed a portion, or if you want to go back and kind of screenshot or save some of that good knowledge that came across today's session, you can go to our YouTube channel. I do encourage you to go ahead and subscribe so that when the new recordings are out, you always kind of stay up to speed with it. Last, I'd like to really put back up that email address in case you have questions about today's session or any of the work that PG Alumni Network does. Go to hello@pgalums.com. So that is it. I really thank everybody for coming in and sharing this hour with us. Thank you again, Alex, for doing so. The seminar was great today. With that, have a great day, and I'll see you guys next month. Bye-bye.